There is no more hermetically sealed, more hostile, and more expensive to survival space in the world than the hull of a nuclear submarine, deeply submerged in the crushing mass of the ocean. Here, at depth, every pound of hydrostatic pressure is not merely a physical limitation. It is a final, unforgiving sentence if something goes fundamentally wrong. And when the heart of this floating city, forged from 9,000 tons of steel, suddenly falls silent, the nuclear reactor, the cost of error becomes absolute. We are not talking about an explosion. We are talking about a moment the US Navy refers to as a scram. It is not an alarm bell. It is not a siren. It is the deafening, terrifying silence that follows the loud crash of control rods slamming into the reactor core, halting the nuclear chain reaction. In that microscopic instant, the submarine, which the fleet trained for decades to be the apex predator, transforms into a helpless, 9,000-ton glider heading nowhere. The stakes? The lives of 150 souls. The enemy? Not an enemy destroyer. The enemy is pure, relentless physics, the chaos that always waits to shatter order. How does the collective mind, forged from steel, protocol, and decades of rigorous training, fight back against this ultimate betrayal of the machine? And what is the true price of duty for the engineers who must willingly enter hell to avert catastrophe? A scram is not a mere malfunction. It is a deliberate emergency shutdown, which can be initiated either by the operator or, far more frighteningly, by automated protective systems that detect the reactor moving outside of acceptable parameters, too high a temperature, too low pressure in the primary loop, or perhaps a threatening spike in neutron flux. When this happens deep underwater, it instantly becomes a crisis of stability and survival. A massive submarine, designed for high speeds, suddenly loses its colossal driving force. The turbine, which was just generating power and thrust, begins to wind down. The first and most critical task, honed to pure instinct, is depth stabilization. If the submarine was operating near its maximum depth, the loss of propulsion means it starts to sink. Inertia and negative buoyancy work against them. Everyone who graduated from the Navy, so nuclear power school, knows the critical order: hold the boat. Immediate action sees the system instantly switch to massive lead-acid batteries, providing the bare minimum power for lights, communication, and, most critically, for operating the stern planes and vital pumps, a desperate transition from a reactor to a battery backup. Simultaneously, high-pressure air is introduced into the ballast tanks in its ballast blow to rapidly increase buoyancy. This requires flawless, reflexive reaction from the operators, consuming precious seconds. In this moment, the sub is within a critical window of time. Should the boat fall below its designed crush depth, structural integrity fails. It is instantaneous implosion. Yet, the scram problem does not end with the halt of the nuclear chain reaction. A second, far more insidious battle begins in the reactor compartment. Even after fission ceases, the fuel elements continue to generate significant residual heat, known as decay heat. In a sealed metal volume, deep underwater, this rapidly escalates from a manageable cooling problem to a survival threat. The immediate protocol: activate the residual heat removal (RHR) pumps, now running on the dying batteries. The objective is to prevent this residual heat from boiling the water in the primary loop, which would result in a critical pressure spike and potential pipe rupture, releasing radioactive materials. In the center of the chaos, with half the compartments bathed in the dim red light of emergency lamps, 3 or 4 nuclear engineers are the only things standing between precise operational discipline and absolute disaster. Deep beneath the surface, The machine's failure forces an undeniable truth upon the crew. Time itself is the ultimate antagonist. Time now works against two fundamental systems: the technological structure of the boat and the physiological limits of the human body. Inside the reactor compartment, where the fight to manage decay heat is raging, the temperature begins to climb with unnerving speed. The residual energy is immense. Without the massive pumps adequately circulating coolant, the air temperature can soar to 60 or even 70 degrees Celsius in a matter of minutes. The engineers battling to identify the cause of the scram and restore proper cooling must function in conditions that push the absolute limit of human physiology. This creates a terrifying contrast. Outside the hull is the absolute crushing, absorbing cold of the deep ocean. Inside, at the very heart of the boat, is a furnace fueled by atomic decay. As the temperature rises, cognitive function plummets. At 65 degrees and high humidity, the ability to make complex, precise decisions falls off a cliff. Dehydration is immediate and severe, forcing the sailors to consume precious water reserves just to maintain operational capacity. Every minute spent fighting hypothermia is a minute in which the emergency batteries drain further, and a minute in which the boat risks losing stability and spiraling into a fatal descent. The Navy trains its nuclear operators not just to repair, but to function with academic precision at the very edge of pain and exhaustion. But the heat is only one enemy. If the scram was triggered by a rupture in the primary cooling loop, a statistically remote but always present risk due to the sheer forces at play, the situation instantly shifts from critical to catastrophic. The water in the primary circuit is highly active. If it breaches containment, it immediately creates a zone of lethal contamination. Sailors instantly don personal dosimeters, but in the chaos, the chief engineer in the control room faces the most terrible calculus of his career. He must weigh two conflicting objectives: save the boat and the crew, and minimize radiation exposure. These goals become direct, horrific antagonists. To secure the reactor and prevent a widespread core meltdown, engineers must inevitably enter the high-risk zone. The Navy sets strict exposure limits, but under the existential threat of losing the vessel, there is an unwritten, agonizing protocol. The engineers are prepared to accept doses that would mandate immediate hospitalization topside, all in the service of returning the reactor to a safe, controlled state. This choice is not momentary heroism. It is the price of duty factored into their very contract. The nuclear engineer on a submarine is a vulnerable unit, trained to accept their own calculated exposure as a variable necessary for mission success and the preservation of the boat. Why have US Navy nuclear submarines never suffered a catastrophic, uncontrolled reactor accident? The answer lies in the legacy of Admiral Hyman G. Rickover. His philosophy was founded on the assumption that the human always fails, and the machine can betray at any moment. Therefore, the only way to ensure safety is through redundancy, iron discipline, and a cultural aversion to error. To understand the stakes when these protocols are violated, we must briefly consider our historical rivals. In 1961, the Soviet K-19 suffered a leak in its primary coolant loop. The lack of adequate equipment and strict protocols led to 8 crew members receiving lethal doses of radiation as they heroically and manually installed a makeshift cooling system. They saved the boat, but lost the battle for their lives. The US Navy built its nuclear safety program on lessons learned vicariously, ensuring that its systems and culture were designed to survive the worst possible human and mechanical failure. Modern US Navy reactors, such as the S-8G or the newer S-9G, S-11G designs, are engineered to resist even a total failure of all active pumps and systems. For example, In the event of a complete loss of electrical power, the boat can revert to a system on natural circulation. The temperature difference between the hot active core and the cooler water in the volume compensator allows the water to circulate without pumps. It is slow, but sufficient for removing the residual decay heat. This is not magic. It is decades of relentless iteration, where every inch of piping has been verified, every pump is triple redundant, and every procedure, even the most mundane, is executed as if nuclear war hangs in the balance. This is an architecture where the failure of the active system is merely the preceding step to the activation of the passive system. However, beyond radiation and heat, there is a third existential threat unique to submarines: atmosphere. The loss of primary power means the eventual loss of the electrolysis systems that generate oxygen and the scrubbers that remove carbon dioxide. A boat floating dead in the water at depth must rely on finite reserves of oxygen candles and lithium CO2 absorption canisters. Every second without the reactor shortens the survival window. Crew members must minimize all physical activity to slow oxygen consumption and the rise of CO2 levels. This is a silent, suffocating crisis running parallel to the dramatic high-temperature fight in the reactor compartment. After hours of struggle in the suffocating heat and darkness, the engineers will either fix the fault and prepare the reactor for restart, or, if the damage is irreparable, the boat must ascend to periscope depth and rely on the auxiliary diesel engine, a risky maneuver rarely practiced by SSNs, SSBNs. Assuming that, through protocol and sheer human endurance, the critical malfunction has been isolated and addressed, the process of restarting the reactor is not a simple turn of a key. It is a slow, methodical, multi-hour protocol where every step requires confirmation of dozens of parameters. Finally, the growing hum of the turbines is heard. Electrical power returns. The boat is alive again. This is the moment when the machine of rescue, built not just of steel, but of collective disciplined intelligence, begins to function fully once more. The immediate crisis is over, but its scars remain. What happens to the crew who have just defeated a reactor failure? They are physically and psychologically exhausted by the heat, the extreme tension, and the potential exposure to radiation. For weeks afterward, the crew will undergo rigorous medical screening, checking their dosimeters and analyzing blood samples for cellular damage. But the deepest injury is psychological. It is the chilling knowledge that beneath their feet lay a bomb ready to detonate, not with an explosion, but with an absolute, toxic silence. And they disarmed it, relying not on luck or divine intervention, but on the absolute, merciless faith in protocol. A nuclear reactor failure on a submarine deep underwater is the Navy's ultimate nightmare. But the response to that nightmare is not chaotic. It is mathematical, honed by decades of training, and based on thousands of failures that have occurred elsewhere, with other operators. The ocean is the primary killer. It grants no quarter and offers no second chances. When the technology we created to dominate this ocean suddenly betrays us, only one element remains unwavering: the human. We forge floating cities of steel and uranium to expand the boundaries of our presence. But when the crisis hits, survival rests on the vulnerable unit, a single engineer standing in the dimness of the reactor compartment, willing to pay the price of duty by accepting invisible exposure, simply so his 9,000-ton home does not become a 9,000-ton tomb. Technology may expand the window of survival, but the fundamental law of the sea remains unchanged, and our readiness to confront that law is the highest form of discipline, what the fleet calls the relentless machine of rescue. The crisis passes, but the legacy of the silence remains. The Navy's ability to survive this ultimate machine betrayal is not accidental. It is the product of an almost fanatical dedication to the principle of total system reliance. They do not merely train to succeed, they train to survive the cascading failure of every redundant system simultaneously. The operational assumption is that if something can go wrong at the worst possible moment, it will. This readiness is forged in the fire of simulation. The engineers and operators spend thousands of hours in land-based trainers, simulating the exact geometry and thermal dynamics of the reactor compartment. These simulators are not comfortable classrooms. They are psychological crucibles designed to replicate the suffocating reality of a primary coolant leak combined with electrical failure and a fire in the auxiliary systems, a combination known as the quote. These are the drills where crew members, already soaked in sweat from simulated 60 degrees heat, are forced to read complex pipe diagrams upside down in the dark, performing maintenance and repair procedures that require micrometric precision, all while fighting cognitive fatigue and the simulated rise of deadly carbon dioxide levels. The point is to burn the protocol so deep into the neural pathways that it operates independent of conscious thought. The response to catastrophe must be automatic, instinctual precision that overrides the human desire to panic. This constant, brutal conditioning is the real reason the relentless machine of rescue functions. The machine is not just the steel hull. The machine is the human collective trained to absorb chaos and exude order. Consider the engineer who accepts the calculated radiation dose to manually reset a valve. His act is the ultimate embodiment of the price of duty. The rest of the crew relies on the fact that he understands that the ship, the collective life support system for 150 people, is orders of magnitude more valuable than the well-being of a single, vulnerable unit. His sacrifice, his exposure, is a debt paid in advance. This is the statistical cruelty of the job. You are trained for the one chance in a million that demands you compromise your own longevity for the immediate survival of the whole. After the power surges back and the lights return to full white, the fight moves to the administrative level. Immediate action is taken to log the exact sequence of events for a post-casualty review. Every gauge reading, every minute of temperature rise, every spoken command, and most importantly, the readings on every personal dosimeter are recorded. This is the moment where the academic precision of the Navy's protocol becomes brutal, unforgiving data. The data reveals who was exposed, by how much, and why. The review process is designed not to assign blame, but to ensure that the systemic weakness that triggered the scram is not only corrected, but can never recur. This continuous, self-critical loop is what distinguishes the US Navy as nuclear fleet from its historical counterparts. The sailors who endured the crisis walk away carrying an invisible burden. The potential for long-term health effects is a silent partner that accompanies them home. This is the ultimate philosophical tension of the submariner's life, the need for absolute human perfection to operate an inherently volatile technology in an utterly unforgiving environment. The success of averting the meltdown confirms their training, but the proximity to disaster confirms the terrifying power of the ocean and the physics they seek to control. The ship is saved, the mission is recoverable, but the human cost, the debt paid in exhaustion, fear, and potential future medical uncertainty, is the unspoken fee for mastery over the nuclear deep. The final verdict is clear. The nuclear submarine, a testament to human ingenuity, is a floating crucible where technology and survival are constantly tested. When the nuclear heart fails deep underwater, the protocol immediately transforms the crew into a desperate, organized collective. They fight the physiological betrayal of heat and the statistical cruelty of radiation, powered only by the waning batteries and the unshakable cultural belief instilled by Rickover. They win because they have accepted the price of duty long before the crisis began. They know the ocean is a merciless void, And only the relentless machine, human and steel combined, can deny it its prize. The immediate aftermath, once the reactor is secured and the boat is stabilized, is deceptively calm. The silence of the scram is replaced by the purposeful hum of machinery brought back online, but the underlying tension remains palpable. The crew must now transition from crisis management to prolonged endurance mode. The long haul requires a fundamental shift in mentality. They are no longer fighting for minutes, but for days, potentially weeks, until they can reach a friendly port for full systems review. This phase exposes another severe vulnerability: the extreme limitations of deep-sea independence when the primary power source is compromised. While the emergency batteries are robust, they are designed for immediate response, not for sustained travel. The priority now shifts to managing energy expenditure down to the smallest detail. Every non-essential system is powered down. The luxury of hot meals, adequate climate control, and even the frequency of communication pulses are sacrificed. This environment amplifies the claustrophobia. The submarine, already a compressed steel tube, becomes colder, dimmer, and quieter. The crew, already psychologically battered, is forced into a state of hypervigilance, knowing that any small secondary failure, a leak in a hydraulic line, a fire in the auxiliary systems, or another electrical fault, could spiral into a new, fatal emergency without the full power of the reactor. The logistical challenge of managing the atmospheric crisis becomes paramount. Despite securing the reactor, the struggle against the rising CO2 levels and dwindling oxygen reserves persists until the boat can safely surface to snorkel, if conditions allow, or use the diesel engine to recharge. This period requires the command structure to operate with the cold precision of an accountant, rationing consumables and human effort. The sailors operate on minimal calories and reduced rest cycles, pushing them into a state of chronic fatigue, where the risk of human error, the very thing Rickover warned against, spikes exponentially. The protocols counter this by enforcing rigid checklists and mandatory two-man rule checks for even the simplest valve adjustments, transforming every minor task into a high-stakes ceremony of verification. This experience reinforces the philosophy of maximum redundancy through minimum space. Every system on a nuclear submarine is designed to fail multiple times before the catastrophic threshold is crossed. For instance, the sheer number of manual valves and bypass loops allows the engineering team to isolate almost any section of the primary system, effectively turning a catastrophic leak into a localized, manageable problem. This level of complexity is why the nuclear training pipeline is arguably the most rigorous in the world. The operators must not only understand the system as designed, but must instantly hypothesize and execute a novel solution for a cascade of failures that the designers never specifically predicted. They must be innovators under duress. In the final reckoning, the success of the scram recovery is a testament to the fact that the most advanced military technology is worthless without the disciplined human element. The price of duty is paid not just in moments of dramatic exposure, but in the sustained, grinding psychological toll of knowing the unforgiving reality of deep-sea nuclear operations. They have beaten the reactor, but the ocean waits, silent and eternal, ready to reclaim its steel tomb. The crew's ultimate success is less about technological superiority and more about a cultural dedication to the axiom: trust the protocol, but verify with your life. The machine of rescue is a powerful tool, but it is ultimately the resilient, vulnerable unit, the sailor, who pays the final, heavy price to keep it running. The final leg of the journey, the limp home to the nearest maintenance facility, transforms the mission from a high-stakes tactical operation into a philosophical meditation on resilience. The submarine, now moving at reduced speed, its systems nursing power from the backup sources, becomes a literal embodiment of the concept of the limping Leviathan. The focus shifts entirely to containment and monitoring. The engineering department maintains an obsessive watch over the reactor's residual heat, ensuring that cooling is stable and that no secondary reaction is occurring within the core. Every 2 hours, a new crew takes turns checking the radiation survey meters, documenting the background levels, and ensuring that no lingering contamination has found its way outside the sealed reactor compartment. This vigilance is crucial because of the insidious nature of potential radiation damage. While the immediate, high-dose threat is gone, the possibility of low-level, widespread internal contamination remains a significant concern. The air filtration systems, which usually run continuously, are pushed to their maximum, filtering out microscopic particulate matter. Every meal eaten, every breath taken, is a calculated risk, a risk they accepted the moment they signed their commitment. This psychological environment creates a profound connection among the crew, a shared understanding of having faced the absolute limit and survived, a bond thicker than steel or shared training. The very design of the submarine now serves as the ultimate firewall against the ocean's hostility. The robust, heavy construction of the reactor shielding, the multiple layers of containment vessels, and the redundant hull integrity systems are the material manifestation of the Navy's trust in physics. They trust that the steel will hold against the pressure, and that the lead and water shielding will contain the invisible threat. But their recent experience has taught them that trust must always be earned anew, every minute, through constant verification. The experience of the reactor failure will become a foundational legend within that boat as history. It will be enshrined in the training law, analysed by the nuclear propulsion program's review boards for decades, and become the invisible standard against which future crews measure their own readiness. Because in the world of nuclear power at sea, a successful recovery from a near catastrophe is not a cause for celebration. It is simply proof that the system, though temporarily broken, did precisely what decades of preparation demanded. When the submarine finally surfaces within sight of the coast, greeted by tugs and escort vessels, the contrast is stark. Above, the world is one of sunlight, air, and safety. Below, in the humid, dim confines of the hull, the crew carries the weight of their invisible debt. They have paid the price of duty in sweat, fear, and potential future health. They have defeated the combined forces of technology failure and oceanic pressure. They have proven that the relentless machine of rescue is not a hyperbole. It is a reality, built on the disciplined, agonizing choices made by humans operating at the edge of the survivable envelope. The true victory is not bringing the boat back. The true victory is bringing the men back, scarred by their proximity to the ultimate darkness, yet unbroken by the statistical cruelty of the deep. The final act of this maritime drama is the debrief and the systemic integration of the failure. Once docked, the crew is not immediately granted rest. They are pulled into a whirlwind of formal protocols, medical examination, psychological debriefings, and the nuclear reactor safeguard review. This administrative intensity is as unforgiving as the esgram itself. The medical team meticulously reviews the dosimeter readings, correlating them with the engineer's logged time in the reactor compartment. For those who accepted higher doses, the scrutiny is intense. They are now officially designated as monitored personnel, their health trajectory permanently altered by a line item in a confidential logbook. This is the final price of duty, the potential for a slow, invisible, biological payment for the minutes of courage spent securing the core. The Navy provides world-class care, but the psychological burden of knowing that a moment of heroism may have shortened their lifespan is a debt no insurance policy can cover. The engineering debrief is equally severe. Every action, every decision, every ignored or acknowledged warning light is dissected by the highest echelons of Naval Nuclear Command. The narrative shifts from what happened to what allowed it to happen, and how do we ensure this exact scenario can never be repeated, regardless of human failure. The goal is to perfect the machine protocol by eliminating every sliver of chaos, randomness, that manifested during the crisis. This relentless pursuit of perfection is why the fleet maintains its impeccable safety record. Every near miss on every submarine contributes a new layer of protection, a new procedural safeguard, a new design redundancy that gets integrated into the next generation of vessels. The engineers who saved the boat now become the primary architects of its future immunity. The wider strategic implication of the scram is also factored into the equation. A nuclear submarine is a strategic asset, a symbol of stealth and power. Its temporary incapacitation is not just a safety failure, it is a momentary vulnerability. The Navy analyzes whether the failure could have been exploited by an adversary, reinforcing the urgency behind the speed of recovery. The quick, disciplined response, the immediate stabilization of depth, and the rapid assessment of core integrity was a demonstration not only of self-preservation, but of preserving strategic deterrence. In the end, the story of the reactor failure is a profound testament to the core philosophy of the US Navy. No one is left behind. This commitment extends far beyond merely retrieving a man overboard. In this context, it means no one is left behind to the mercy of physics, to the ravages of an uncontrolled nuclear reaction, or to the final embrace of the deep ocean. The collective mind, the relentless machine of rescue, operates at maximum capacity to save every life and every 9,000 tons of steel. The sailors who walked through the darkness and heat and stared down the invisible threat of radiation are the true measure of that commitment. They are the vulnerable units who collectively prove that even in the most hostile environment on Earth, human discipline and the price of duty are ultimately stronger than the laws of decay and the absolute chaos of the abyss. The final enduring element of this experience is the transmutation of the event into legend, a necessary process for maintaining the cultural intensity required of submariners. Below the surface, the story of the day the lights went out morphs into a cautionary tale and a badge of honor. It is the intangible currency of experience exchanged during long, silent watches in the control room. The veteran who led the RHR effort doesn't simply recall the procedure. He relays the feeling of the heat, the smell of the ozone, and the superheated air, the sheer crushing weight of the decision to remain in the active zone. This oral history is essential because the challenge of nuclear propulsion is fundamentally an issue of maintaining belief. The belief that the protocols will hold, the belief that the materials will not fail, and the belief that the person next to you will perform their duty flawlessly, even when every instinct screams retreat. The scram provided a brutal, real-world stress test of this belief system. The fact that they survived, that the protocols worked despite the terrifying odds, reinforces the cultural discipline. It creates a feedback loop. Extreme training leads to successful survival, which reinforces the culture, allowing for even more extreme training. The technological solution derived from this crisis, perhaps a software patch, a physical interlock, or a new maintenance routine, is the measurable outcome. But the philosophical outcome is the true long-term asset. The crew returns to sea not just with a repaired reactor, but with an enhanced sense of their own collective capability. They have seen the abyss. They have felt the pressure of minutes that felt like hours, and they have chosen duty over self-preservation. This shared ordeal fundamentally changes their perception of risk. They no longer merely know the protocols, they inhabit them. This narrative loop, crisis, endurance, analysis, integration, is how the US Navy maintains its edge in the unforgiving domain of the deep. It acknowledges the sheer raw power of the chaos randomness that the ocean represents, but it counters it with the unyielding force of the machine. Protocol. The human is the intermediary, the translator who converts abstract training into concrete action. And in that conversion lies the true, final definition of the price of duty. It is the unending commitment to stand firm against the universe's tendency toward disorder, deep within the steel confines of a world built entirely on the fragile balance of controlled atomic fission. The submarine sails again, carrying not just its missiles and its mission, but the quiet, profound wisdom gained from staring into the heart of its own catastrophic potential. The epilogue to this survival story is the return to anonymity. A nuclear submarine, by its very nature and strategic mission, is built for silence. The S-Gram incident, though a localized apocalypse for those aboard, remains classified, absorbed into the confidential annals of naval nuclear history. And there are no public medals for the nameless engineers who accepted the high doses of radiation. There are no parades for the navigators who fought inertia and depth to hold the boat against the crushing hydrostatic pressure. Their victory is internal and operational. This enforced silence serves a dual purpose: strategic security and the psychological integrity of the system. Publicizing the near catastrophe would compromise operational security and potentially fuel anxiety about the safety of the nuclear fleet. More profoundly, within the Navy, the quiet acceptance of extreme risk without public validation is itself a feature of the duty. The value of the submariner lies in his absolute commitment, independent of external reward. Their recognition comes in the form of continued assignments, high-level commendations filed deep within their personnel jackets, and the profound, silent nod exchanged among those who were in the control room when the reactor died. The physical reality of the repaired vessel is also a testament to this philosophy. The damage is fixed, the systems certified as better than new. The boat is purged of all contaminating traces, both physical and atmospheric. She is once again ready for deployment, ready to become the relentless machine of deterrence. But the boat is not just steel and propulsion. She is a vessel carrying the ghosts of the near failure. The memory of the event remains etched into the bulkheads and the operational routines. Every time an engineer checks the pressure gauge, he recalls the spike. Every time a control rod is cycled, the crew remembers the terrifying clunk of the scram. The ultimate takeaway from this scenario is the reaffirmation of the technological philosophy. Human error is inevitable. System failure is optional. The decade-long dedication of the nuclear power program is to make the consequences of the inevitable human error survivable. The S-Gram was a human error, a mechanical fault, or an environmental factor. But the catastrophe was averted because the system and the disciplined humans within it were trained to withstand the failure. The vulnerable unit, the human sailor, emerges from the deep not as a triumphant hero in the traditional sense, but as the disciplined servant of an uncompromising protocol. His survival is a statistical marvel, purchased at the price of duty and underwritten by the collective, colossal effort of the organization. As the submarine slips back beneath the waves, disappearing into the cold, silent depths, it carries the quiet understanding that beneath the surface, the battle against the primary killer is never truly won. It is merely postponed by perpetual vigilance and absolute non-negotiable adherence to the code, This is the enduring reality of the nuclear fleet.